Welcome to the Unlist. This is part 2 of my Avon favorites. So in part 1, I talked about some of my all-time favorites. I talked about a lot of older fragrances, like the original 1949 Avon for men. I talked about a number of women's market fragrances from the mid-20th century, really old stuff, right? And then I also mentioned a couple more noteworthy fragrances from the men's side, stuff that's still being made, that's among my favorites, like Mesmerize and Black Suede. And I mentioned a couple obscure things too. I mean, I talked about Paradigm from 2002, also called Class Act in the UK, and it was also known as Aspire in South Africa and Mexico. But by and large, I didn't talk a whole lot about men's fragrances, and I didn't talk a whole lot about more contemporary stuff, or at least things from the 80s forward. I focused on a lot of really, I guess what you would call antique Avon fragrances, and a lot of women's market stuff. And some of you guys out there, just no matter what I say, if it's for her, if it comes in a pink bottle, you will not even entertain the notion of touching it. Like, you can't even like touch it with a stick. Like, you will have the femme cooties and all of a sudden you will just grow boobs or something. I don't know. But it's okay, guys. I don't hate you. I don't hate you. It's fine. Some people see it that way. Different strokes, different folks. But I'm still going to pick on you. That's just how it is. I'm going to pick on you. So this video is going to focus a little more on the men's stuff. For my He-Man, male, macho, alpha, wolf, sigma grind set guys out there, you know, this one's for you. And I'm also going to talk a little more about more recent Avon fragrances, at least within the last 25, 30 years, maybe some stuff from the 80s, but I'm going to try and keep it in that area. And one of the big reasons why, which I didn't really talk a whole lot about in the first part of this video, is I did most of my Avon buying in the early 2000s. So 20 years ago is when I was at peak Avon, 20 years ago. All the stuff that I have now is either from back then, it's either from 20 years ago and I've had it that long, or it's stuff that I had used up and I had to repurchase when I decided to effectively go back home, as it were, after all of the designer and niche exploration I had done. I decided to just go back to basics and pick up a lot of these Avon fragrances that I had once enjoyed but had, I guess, let slip. But most of the things that I have, I've kind of always had. And that's because in the early 2000s, when I was extremely dirt poor, more dirt poor than I am now, Avon is what I bought. And if you were to look at my wardrobe from like 2001, 2002, you would actually see like 40 fragrances and like 35 of them are Avon. And the other 5 are designers I picked up for sale somewhere at like Walmart or whatever. You know, I remember my first bottle of Halston Z14 came from a drugstore back then. My first bottle of Yope was a gift from somebody, stuff like that. So I had a handful of designers, but the vast majority of it was Avon, and it came from catalogs that either my mom gave me, or catalogs that my boss's wife gave me, or catalogs I picked up from the local hardware store, or da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, so that's how I got the stuff back then. It was all dirt cheap. A lot of it was inventory that was purchased ahead of time, because a lot of Avon ladies like to stock things. They try to discourage that because you get stuck with it, because it's an MLM, right? Being an MLM, Avon makes all their money up front. Once you buy the product from Avon, they make all the money they're ever going to make. So then you have to sell it at a slight markup and make your money back. So most smart Avon ladies will take orders from people, collect orders, and then submit the orders. So that way they get their cut right away. You know, they don't have to make purchases from Avon until they've already got the money from their customers. So they're not having to take a temporary loss. But some Avon ladies wanted to have it on hand. So they would go ahead and drop a couple $100 on inventory, you know, at the wholesale prices that they were allowed to get it for. And then try and sell it. And then get stuck with it. And then sell it at a loss. And then I get to buy it. So it's how I got a lot of that. Back then, it's how I got a lot of that stuff. From Avon ladies who had overzealously ordered inventory that they couldn't move. And the reason is, and this is real quick before I get into my favorites, the real reason is As I mentioned in my video about what happened to cheap fragrances, Avon had a period of exponential growth. Not in terms of sales or in terms of profit, but exponential growth as a company. Because Andrea Jung, the first female CEO for the company, saw the future in trying to go head to head with designers and also trying to enter the brick and mortar retail space. So she opened boutiques in some countries like China and Malta. She would have in-store counters, places like JCPenney, and then she would also diversify the company's holdings by having separate catalogs for separate things. So there was an Avon skincare catalog, an Avon fragrance catalog, an Avon for Men catalog that was just serving men and men's products, and the men's range got greatly expanded. Problem is, when you expand that much that quickly, and you're spending all that money to make sure all those products are actually, worth a damn, right? You're burning a lot of cash really quickly. And all those fragrances suddenly have to compete against each other. All those cosmetics have to compete against each other. So when you get a new catalog every month, and every month that catalog adds like 5 or 6 new fragrances on top of the 15 that are already there, and the catalog's like that thick, you get overwhelmed very quickly. And a lot of these fragrances lived by the sword and died by the blade. And I was there and I owned them, and some of them were fan-freaking-tastic, but barely had like a 6-month lifespan in terms of market life, shelf life, 6 months, and that was it. Never heard from again, never seen again. And all those bottles litter eBay. All those bottles litter Etsy and Mercari. All that stuff sits in closets now. People's grandmothers and great aunts have that stuff. They've had it for 20, 30 years, longer even in some cases, just in closets. Ordered, unsold. So now, one of my favorites from that time period, the year 2000 actually, is a fragrance called Avon Womo. You guys might be thinking, well, Womo, that's Italian, right? Like brands that call a man's fragrance Womo or L'Uomo, that's an Italian thing, right? Yeah, but Avon tried doing that. And Avon Womo was an interesting fragrance. It was almost like a poor man's Coriolan, if you've smelled Coriolan by Guerlain, which came out a couple years before, like 98, 97. So it's a very green, very aromatic, but also at the same time, very resinous sheep fragrance. The key difference between the Guerlain, obviously, and the Avon is the Avon has a bunch more amber in it. So it's, Coriolan's not particularly ambery. It has amber, yes, but it's not particularly ambery. Whereas with the Avon Womo, once you get past all that lovely green goodness in the opening and heart, you settle into a very earthy, still very strongly green though. Patchouli is a big part of the fragrance. So is oak moss, okay? Make no mistake. It is very much a sheep through and through, but it has a lot of amber. Avon's very signature, one of the famous things about Avon is their house amber. Their amber is smoother and more labdanum heavy. A lot of ambers are more spicy or more musky, right? Well, Avon's amber is more on the labdanum side. They really like the rock rose. So you'll notice with a lot of Avon amber-centric fragrances, they go very heavy on the rock rose. And this is no exception. This is exactly the same. So if you want a very green, resinous, patchouli-forward sheep fragrance with a fat amber bottom note that's more smooth than it is spice, then Avon Womo, year 2000. It's right up your alley. And they had it in cologne, they had it in aftershave, because of course they did, right? They had it in skin soothers, they had it in bar soap. So yeah, you could go nuts with it, but one of my favorites. Another one I really like, let's go all the way back to 1983. Avon Musk for Men. This seems kind of like a weird choice, because you're like, well, Avon Musk for Men, that must be some kind of Jovan or Coty knockoff, right? Wrong. This is the furthest thing from Jovan musk for men, furthest thing from Cody musk. This is not an Alyssa Ashley number. This is not a Kiehl's. This is not one of those, okay? This is not like Brown. All those fragrances, whether we're talking the Kiehl's, whether we're talking the Jovan, whether we're talking the Cody, the various Schulten and MEM variants, that 70s musk period, this is not them. This does not smell like fake wood paneling and rich Corinthian leather and Ricardo Montalban's voice. This does not smell like that, okay? This does not smell like an 8-track full of Fog Hat tunes. It doesn't, all right? Get that out of your mind. Avon Musk for Men came out in the 80s, so it's kind of privy to the style of the 80s. And, you know, the style of the 80s was all about being more animalic, right? 80s fragrances were generally, for men, were more animalic than they were in the 70s. That was the big shebang. So what Avon did here, bless their souls, they decided to create a very picture-perfect reconstruction of Tonkin musk, of deer musk. So naturally, it's not going to have real deer musk in it because it's Avon, so they went very heavy on the Tonkatone. And those of you who are into perfuming or DIY perfumery, you know what Tonkatone is, right? So this is very, very prominent Tonkatone fragrance. Plus it has some other goodies. It has a little bit of pine in there, a little bit of patchouli in there, okay? It's not just musk. It's not a sledgehammer, but it has a very beautiful deer musk note to it. And then it has a little bit of castoreum to give it that leathery, slightly breathy feel that castoreum has, that sort of fatty smell, you know, like the fat of a T-bone steak. And that's a weird comparison for castoreum, but those of you who eat T-bone steaks, you know what I'm talking about. So that chewed on leather kind of thing, leather strap, so that's what castoreum gives me, that vibe. So it's a little bit of that in there, a little bit of that in there. And that's just fantastic. You know, a slightly resinous, slightly green, not very heavily spiced, mind you, not a very spicy leather. It's a little bit green, a little bit resinous, but very rich, very, very fur of the animal kind of a musk, right? And I'm just shocked that Avon would put something like that out. And of course, it didn't last very long. It got reformulated and replaced. It was out until about, I think, 87 or 88, so like 5 years. Then they made a black cap version, and the black cap version was entirely different. I mean, it was still the same musk profile, but they really turned down the Tonkatone, and they got rid of the castoreum, and they made it more of a white musk. So it was like a more contemporary musk for the late 80s, early 90s, where we were heading with musks by that point, white, you know, Jovan white musk, et cetera, et cetera. But man, those brown cap, those early 80s, mid 80s brown cap bottles, and they had a spray and they had a splash. Those are something else, man. These are bold words, okay? So some of you are going to be like, no way, no way. But I am telling you, I have not smelled a better artificial deer musk reconstruction at any price. Any price. I am comparing this to $300 bottles. I am comparing this to $500 bottles. This Avon freaking musk fragrance is the most lifelike, the most true to form, synthetic construction of a deer musk note I've ever smelled. Ever. Okay? No, it's not perfect. No, it doesn't smell like real Tonkin deer musk if you have pods handy or you have, you know, some kind of paste handy. You have a tincture. No. It's not going to smell like that. It's not going to smell like a Rouge L'Adore. Okay? It's not going to smell like a Rouge L'Adore. So don't come at me with that or I'll block you. I will just freaking block you. I do not care. Don't come at me with that. But for synthetic, for something that is based around Tonkatone, yeah, it's pretty freaking impressive. And the fact that it's Avon and it was sold for like 10 bucks originally, like sold for almost nothing, makes it even more impressive. And trust me, when you spray this on and you walk outside, people smell you. They're going to be like, wow, what kind of niche fragrance are you wearing? Like, it's not going to smell like anything mainstream at all. It's going to blow minds. you're going to almost be like embarrassed to say, oh, this is an Avon fragrance, right? You don't want to tell people that it's an Avon fragrance because it smells too good to be an Avon fragrance. Oh, it's too good. But yeah, Avon Musk for Men, trust me. Just spend the money, pick it up. If you don't like it, that's fine. You can mail me your bottle. I'll take it. I don't care. All right, moving right along, okay? There is another fragrance from the 2000s that I really liked. And it, to me, is kind of like the fragrance that I feel like Armani Code and all those kind of fragrances could have been, but weren't. And it came out in 2001, and it was called Avon Intrigue. And Avon Intrigue was basically like a very rich tonka-based, amber-based fragrance that had lavender in it. So think of the Armani Black Code / Armani Code structure, but then put like a cup of Earl Grey tea into it. So put like a real nice bergamot / black tea note in there, and then round it off and make it rich and spicy. That just sounds good, doesn't it, right? A wearable cup of Earl Grey tea with some amber in there and some tonka in there, right? That just sounds good. Well, guess what, fellas? It is good. But it's an Avon fragrance, and no one knows what it is. No one's heard of it. So there you go. Now let's go into the 90s a little bit, okay? There is a fragrance from the 90s that I really like. And I mentioned Far Away, I think, already in my previous video, so I'm not going to mention that one again. But it was a fragrance that came out in 97, just a year before Far Away for Men came out. And it was called Starring, with an exclamation point next to it. Now, Starring is another really sort of like, if this had been released by another house, it would have been much bigger. So Starring kind of smells like what you get if you were to take something like Jaipur Homme and remove all the nutmeg and remove all the dustiness from it. So that dusty, powdery. A lot of folks don't really care for a Jaipur because it has that heavy, dusty nutmeg feel. A bit too powdery for some people. So imagine taking that out and then leaving everything else. So it's almost like if you were to take, like, you know, Jaipur and you were to cut it halfway with Paul Sebastian, which, you know, Paul Sebastian has more along the lines of Armoire, which is another word for Artemisia. So it's got more Armoire in it and a little more of a fatty musk profile and a little heavier on lavender. Okay, so that's basically what you're dealing with. Some folks don't really care for the amount of vanilla that's in Starring, but the vanilla in Starring for me is not very bakery good. It's not very like vanilla extracty. It's more like vanilla flower. For me, the vanilla in Starring is actually very palatable because it's light and floral vanilla. It's not that stickly, nasty, sweet stuff that you would normally get in a fragrance today. That's very heavy on vanilla. But that's one of my more, of all the gourmand stuff that came out in the 90s and 2000s, you know, I'd say Intrigue and Starring are among the best. And they're both Avon fragrances, so surprise. Okay. Now another one that I like. Imagine if someone tried to like reinterpret Aqua Velva for a modern audience and make it a fragrance and not an aftershave. Well, see, Avon tried doing that in 2001, again, early 2000s fragrance, called Modern Balance. So Modern Balance kind of feels like a bastard child of Czar by Van Cleef & Arpels and Aqua Velva, in the sense that it has the fougere top notes of Czar. It's got the green, the patchouli, okay, it's the juniper, all that good stuff, the lavender. But then it has an isobutylquinoline leather base. It has a sour IBQ leather base underneath of it. So it's like a fougere top with a leather sheep bottom end. And it has a little bit of mint in there too, which is where the Aqua Velva part comes in. It's got some menthol in there, so it's minty in the opening. And then it goes minty, and then green, and then woody, and then leathery. And yes, there's an aftershave as well, so it really could be like Aqua Velva in some ways if you decide to use it after a shave. But it's truly what it tries to be, a modern balance. It tries to be an old school fragrance with some modern touches, or at least modern for 20 years ago. Because remember, we're talking 2001, so we're talking a very long time ago. So it tries to be modern for the turn of the 21st century. Speaking of that, we go forward a little bit, and we reach a fragrance that is called Tomorrow for Men. Now, Tomorrow for Men is one that's still made in some countries. It's not made in the US anymore, but it's still made in Poland and places like that. Tomorrow for Men is one of the most fantastic male market ambers I've ever smelled. This is like with Avon Musk for Men is like the best Tonka style musk reconstruction I've ever smelled. Well, this Avon Tomorrow for Men is like the best amber focused fragrance, and it's not trying to be an amber note on underneath. It's a amber fragrance. It is all about amber. So it is the best male market amber fragrance I've ever smelled. It is earthy, it is spicy, it has a little bit of musk. It does introduce a little bit of gourmand to it because we're talking 2005, okay? So that was right around Dior Homme when it launched. So yeah, there's cocoa in here. Yeah, there's vanilla in here. Yeah, there's some other slight fruity notes, but they are really underneath the amber. The amber is the star of the show. This is basically Avon showing the world what like 140 years of specializing in amber looks like. They're like, okay, you guys, you want to like talk about Guerlain, you want to talk about Caron, you want to talk about Creed and all these other houses. Well, we've been around just as long as they have. We've been around since like 1887, okay? We're going to show you what like a century and a half of being good at something looks like. And their thing has always been amber. Avon's in-house amber accord has been the star of hundreds of their fragrances. So in this fragrance, which is weird that it's a men's market fragrance. It's a men's market fragrance. But in this fragrance, Tomorrow for Men, they decide to put that Avon House Amber note as the star of the show. It is the thing that your eyes are on. And it is one of the best, especially for the price. Because I've smelled $200 and $300 and $400 ambers. I have smelled ambers from all kinds of niche brands. Now, Middle Eastern ambers will destroy this, okay? Make no mistake. Middle Eastern ambers will absolutely destroy this Avon amber, hands down. They will destroy it. But we're not talking about that. It's like with the Tonkin reconstruction. We're not talking a Rouge L'Adore here. Same thing. We're not talking Amouage here. We're not talking some souk in the middle of a bazaar somewhere, okay, in like Dubai. We're not talking that. We're talking within the purview of Western fragrances. This is one of the best Western ambers I've ever smelled. I would actually put Tomorrow for Men right up against stuff like Dana Taboo. I would. I honestly would. For some of you, that is like a reach. That's a big reach. But again, I'm all about making hot takes today in this episode. So I'm telling you, Tomorrow for Men, 2005, Avon. One of the best ambers. And it's pitched to men. But women can enjoy it too because amber is like a universal love. Obviously, everyone loves amber. So if you're a lady, don't hesitate to try this out. Tomorrow for Men. Trust me. Trust me on that. You will like it. And we're getting close to the end. I don't want to hit 25 minutes. Like I said, that's my magic number. So I will end this. I will end this with a fragrance that is going way back in time. We are going to go to 1973 with an Avon called Blend 7. I'm not even going to tell you what it's about. I'm just going to say it's a really good fragrance. You go buy it at your own risk and see if I'm right or wrong. Okay, guys, thank you for watching my second and last video of my Avon favorites. I could honestly probably do a third one, but I'm not going to. And hope you enjoyed it. This has been the On List. Goodbye.